Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. In this video, we're going to do part 2 of Little Blue Book number 1087, titled The Facts About Fascism. Written by Miriam Allen DeFord. Copyright May of 1926. So right in the middle of fascism. So fascism was alive and well. Mussolini was in power when this was written. So straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. All right, here we go. Chapter 2. The fascists come into power. Yep, my little green light's on. My phone is working. All right, Chapter 2. The fascists come into power. Such episodes as the one outlined in Pencara, of course, met with much resistance when attempted in large cities. Moreover, Italy was in the throes of the immediate post-war period. It was affected, as was every country in Europe, by the revulsion against war, the sharpened class consciousness, the proletarian sympathy with Russia that made communism seem almost possible for a time after the dastardly peace of Versailles. There were strikes and rebellions, the Federation of Trade Unions, which had become particularly practically a constituent part of the Socialist Party, was enormously strong. In several places, the workers seized the factories and hoisted the red flag. All this, of course, the fascists met with an intensification of their already existing tactics. There were pitched battles in Ravenna, Ferrara, Bologna, and elsewhere. Labor leaders were murdered, newspaper offices fired, and the black shirts were in every proved instance the aggressors. Finally, in July 31st, 1921, the Federation of Trade Unions called a general strike. The fascists set out openly to break it, not only by scabbing, but also by their preferred mode of direct action. The king, Victor Emmanuel III, was appealed to proclaim martial law throughout the country, but the King of Italy is a prudent man. He had before him the example of the Tsar of all the Russians. If therefore was a way to keep his head on his shoulders, he meant to find it. He did. On October 24th, 1922, a fascist congress was called in Naples by Mussolini, avowedly being held in that city because heretofore the greater strength of fascism had come from northern Italy, and Mussolini wanted to impress and frighten the southerners. At this Congress, he declared himself openly in favor of the existing monarchy. This placated the regular army, removed the doubts of those who had observed his previous flirtations with republicanism, and satisfied the king. Likewise, at this Congress, the following fascist demands were set forth: dissolution of Parliament, change of the electoral system, the abandonment by the government of neutrality between the radicals and the fascists, a rigid financial policy, the postponement of evacuation of the Third Dalmatian Zone, and the appointment of fascist ministers of the Army, Navy, Aviation, Foreign Affairs, Labor, and Public Works. At the conclusion of this Congress, Mussolini organized the famous March on Rome, by which organized bands of fascists, estimated at anywhere from 40,000 to 100,000 in number, marched from all parts of Italy to the national capital to enforce these demands. Once more, and pressingly, the government and the labor forces implored the king to proclaim martial law. On October 28th, he definitely refused. Mussolini and his army were camped outside Rome. On the 29th, the king sent word to Mussolini inviting him to form a cabinet according to his own ideas. with himself as premier. He accepted, and on October 30th became premier of Italy. The fascist control of the country has continued to this day. As soon as they came into power, the fascists proceeded to enforce their demands and to make other alterations and reforms in the body politic. The royal guard was dismissed, and the fascist militia itself cut down one half to 70,000. But to make up for this, a volunteer militia of national security was organized, to which all members of the fascist party. Oop, turning the page. Come on, you. Oh, it flipped right out of my hand. Okay, to which all members of the fascist party must belong. A great number of railroad employees also found themselves without jobs. The railroads had been governmentally owned, and the fascists were aiming to private ownership of all industries, in the interest of the capitalists and the bourgeoisie. Orders were given against violence, with a punishment of 30 months in jail for administration of castor oil. But they were a mere gesture, and seldom enforced except against some fascist out of favor with the leaders of his party. The principal changes made were in the electoral system and in regard to the trade unions. Previously, Italy had had proportional representation, each party having a candidate in the field being entitled to a percentage of the deputies in the chamber, according to the vote cast for it. Under the new system, the party polling the greater numbers of votes is entitled to a two-thirds majority in the Chamber of Deputies. This, of course, means that the Fascist Party must be the winning party in every election. How this is accomplished may be seen by a quotation from Domini, an organ of the Catholic Party in Milan, published in February of 1923. We're going to do a hydrate before we start that little article. How the elections are held in the small town is graphically described in one of the many letters we have received. The facts may be easily verified. A few days before Election Sunday, elections are held on Sunday in Italy, or at least they were then, in the tiny village where organizations have been dissolved and social clubs closed or watched. The bosses of the government party, Fascisti, give the following warning. Election day is near. If you are a salaried man, remember that you must vote. If you fail, you will be deprived of your job. If you are a businessman, think of your window, which will be smashed if you abstain from voting. If you are an opponent, remember that we have clubs and castor oil. Nobody dares propose party lists. Socialists, liberals, and popular members of the Catholic Party are excluded. The list is one and all must vote for the government candidates. Those who stay away from the polls are immediately singled out and punished. Secret balloting is no more. The modern election system has been radically changed. The booth in the election hall has disappeared. The ballot box is in the center of the hall, watched by a president who must not see what goes on. If he remembers that he is a magistrate and must supervise the election, he takes a grave risk in incurring the fate of 60 magistrates in Greco-Milanese who were set upon by the mob and beaten. The voter who, aggrieved and humiliated, reaches the door of the election hall, sees before him his witnesses, his judges, and his eventual executioners. The ticket is handed to him, and he hurries across the hall, his arm extended to drop it into the box. His duty performed, the voter goes out, almost fleeing, and the next day, he will hear the echo of the Bacchanalia held by the victors, sometimes accompanied by bloody encounters. Under such circumstances, the astounding majorities rolled up by the fascists at each election may well be understood. And to this, the suppression or emasculation of every opposition newspaper of whatever party, and it will be seen what a farce is democratic government in Italy today. Note also the amazing situation of a party almost entirely and ardently Roman Catholic, including in its suppressions and persecutions not only communists, socialists, and Freemasons, but members and organs of the Catholic Popular Party as well. The fascists brook no opposition from whatever source. In a speech during the early days of his premiership, Mussolini announced, "The question is very clear. Demolish the whole social democratic superstructure." Having accomplished this as far as the ballot and the newspaper were concerned, the fascists naturally turned their attention next to the strong and well organized and socialistically inclined trade unions. But since destruction to be throughout must erect another edifice on the ground of the one raised, the scheme of fascist trade unions was worked out to take the place of the old trade unions, which were abolished by means of violence. The new fascist trade unions were a guild character. They included not only all occupations, but also the employers, although the latter have been slow in coming in. Private property was declared to be right, if not parasitic or profiteering. In fact, private ownership of public utilities was recommended and aimed at. The basic unit of these unions was the cooperation, a union of the various elements of production of a given branch, to which the work of each is directed through each belongs in a direct category or craft. The category is the fascist substitute for the class of socialist economics. Not only employees and employers were to be organized into these corporations, but also representatives of the state and of that mythical being, since all must be owners or producers under the capitalist system, the consumer. Groups of competence, yeah, groups of competence were also formed, made up of experts in various lines of work, who were to serve as consultants and researchers with a view to improving the various industries. There were also volunteer militias to work the land and to serve in other basic national activities. Unemployment was to be removed by means of work committees, which made levies for public works. These levies, however, were regarded really as investments, since the money given was invested as shares in the industries concerned, particularly the various state monopolies, such as the one in cigarettes. Yeah, there was a monopoly in cigarettes in Italy, were abolished in favor of syndicate monopolies under private ownership, paying taxes to the state. There are some excellent points in all this, worthy of serious study by economists. There is also much which undoubtedly grew from the predilections and experience of the syndicalists. That's a weird word to me, who made up so large a part of the early fascist movement. But we must remember that it was all ordained and accomplished, so far as it was accomplished, by force, and that the recalcitrant unions of the old dispensation saw their headquarters burned and their leaders murdered. Giuseppe Prezzolini, in an article in the New Republic for November 1st, 1922, indicates how the fascists coerced even radical organizations into ostensible agreement with the new order. Before I read that, we'll hydrate. Alrighty. A sample of the methods by which socialist or communist leagues have been moved to go over and block to the fascisti has been described to me by a friend living in Ferrara. The president of a league, who is a farm worker, of course, is singled out. When he makes his regular trip to market on Thursday or Friday, he is unfailingly beaten up by a crowd of fascisti. In addition to the bodily harm done him and to the loss of his produce, he is prevented from transacting any business whatever in town. After this has been going on for a month, the man is in desperate straits and does not know which way to turn. Then suddenly he receives a visit from a deputation of fascisti. See here, Tony, we're not trying to prevent a poor man from making a living. If you want to sell your stuff in the market, all you have to do is to join us. Just tear up that red rag of yours and put on a fascisti button. Everybody is doing it. You had better come and get on the bandwagon. Once you're on our side, no one will touch you. Don't worry about the question of wages or prices. We are looking after your interest, and everything will be all right. Naturally, since this world is not populated entirely by heroes and martyrs, the League president takes up the question with his comrades, and the League goes over to the fascisti the next day. In other cases, whole districts are terrified by armed raids, truckloads of fascisti descending upon villages, shooting to right and left, and burning or dismantling the houses of recalcitrant communists. The district at once joins the fascisti in exchange for guarantees of immunity from such raids. Under these circumstances, the wonder is that there still remained and remains an effective opposition in Italy, that the whole country was not swamped and silenced. It must be remembered also that these tactics were employed not only against radicals, but also against the members of any party opposed to the fascists. Nevertheless, the submerged minorities continued to appeal to the world for help and to raise their voices in protest, as long as they had any means to be heard. As we shall see, the long arm of the fascisti stretched out even to America to silence these protests. Anti-fascist papers were suppressed. Yep, go on turn the page. There we go. Okay. Anti-fascist papers were suppressed. If they were printed by private plants, the printers were intimidated. If they owned their own plants, these were broken up. Editors were arrested and in some cases beaten. A typical sample is this. The Libertario in the fascist days of last October, written on February 17th, 1923, the printing rooms and the library of the Libertario were destroyed. The fury of the new vandal had left nothing of the fruit of 30 years of patient work. The loss amounts to 300,000 lira. Our comrade, Benazzi, is in the hospital, the victim of an incurable disease. A policeman is at his bedside. Or this. The Ordine Nuovo of Turin has had its offices occupied by the fascist militia. It came out clandestinely for a time on St. Bartholomew's Night. Its editors and the business manager were arrested and threatened with death. All the machines were destroyed. To take the place of the destroyed papers, or those so censored as to be quite colorless, the fascists not only established new papers, but a journalistic trust under fascist management with a capital of 35 million lira was formed to take over 5 of the largest daily papers in Bologna, Milan, Rome, and Naples. Genoa had already been blessed with a fascist daily, the editor of which was a member of the fascist council and a provincial fiduciary. Thus, as Avanti remarked on 19th of June, 1923, with all troublesome voices reduced to silence, Italy will be fascisticized, even in the journalistic field. And then, who will dare to say that might does not make right? In July 1926, the papers were cut to 4 pages and forbidden to print anything at all but official fascist news. An amusing but significant indication of the spirit of the months following the fascist coup was reported by the London Daily Herald in July of 1923. It seems that an American film company was about to make a motion picture of Hall Caine's novel, The Eternal City. The theme of this novel is an imaginary bloodless revolution in Rome, led by a religious pacifist named David Rossi. Surprised that the fascist would permit the filming of such a picture, the Herald reporter interviewed Miss Oida Bagir, who was writing the scenario. This wonderful work, said Miss Bergier, is to be used in combating socialism by the very simple process of turning the hero from a socialist into a fascist. You see, the Italian government is going to be very helpful in giving permission for the taking of shots. Okay, taking of shots of historical buildings and in generally helping the production of the film. And so in return, Sir Hall Caine has agreed that his socialist shall be converted into something like Mussolini. In like manner, the fascist undertook to turn everything in Italy into something like Mussolini. But it is one thing to conduct a revolutionary or counter-revolutionary coup, and quite another to govern a nation thus wrestled from its former leaders. This problem the fascists found themselves facing by the beginning of 1923. And that is the end of video number 2, part 2, and chapter 2 of Little Blue Book number 1087, titled The Facts About Fascism, written by Miriam Allen DeFord, copyright May of 1926. Thanks for listening, and join me in part 3.